Now, Stephen has given us many discussions on LGBTQ people in the Bible and the quote-unquote clobber passages and the theology. So I think it's okay if we skip over that this year. If you're looking for any of that, they're all on YouTube, either under last year's sermon or the Bible for Busy People. It's the Bible study with a lovely PowerPoint. It's a great refresher. I am wondering if we can go through the past couple of millennia where Christianity has already grown a little bit, and it's starting to feel the growing pains, if you will. In preparation for today, I ended up, of course, at 11 p.m. on Thursday in the most glamorous parts of the internet, the United Church of Canada archives. I am, above all things, a history major at heart. Give me the obscure meeting notes. Send me the gossip that was only passed down through one letter that's half burnt. Tell me the story of that statue that was both graffitied and then ungraffitied and re-graffitied again. I want to know. There are meeting minutes across all subjects in the UCC because we love our God and also we love our bureaucracy. With the Education and Student Committee of the previous presbytery, I found an awful lot of notes. And in there in 2013, there it is. Inquirer process begins for RH. Lorna and Norm to sit on the discernment committee. Those 13 words were the very start of my ministry calling, written rather obscurely, if we're going to be honest. It is like every other inquirer, they all have the exact same formula. But those 13 words contain nothing about my gender, or my race, or my age, my sexuality, any disabilities, my family life. In fact, the next year, the same sentence was there. Inquirer process begins for SM. Lorna to sit on discernment committee. SM, that we might know a couple SMs, maybe a Stephen Milton or two. Then again, there's nothing there about his age, sexuality, married life, gender, race, nothing. If all that historians had to go on for my biography were those two sentences, it would be very, very short. And this is still in the age of the internet. This is when things can be easily found online, when almost everything in our lives can be recorded and posted. Compare this to hundreds and thousands of years ago, when history dissolves into sand so easily. Civilizations faded over time. Queer historians have always had two important struggles. One, sexuality and gender identity as a concept have always been fluid, and their definitions have changed throughout time. We can't go back to ancient Ethiopia and ask the early Christians, do you identify as bisexual? They will have no clue what you're talking about. And secondly, homosexuality and gender fluidity have been at various points criminalized. So there's a vested interest for many in not writing it down to risk trouble, or to write it down to accuse someone of that who's usually a political enemy. So we're fighting an uphill battle. Historians are not neutral observers. We've always brought our own ways of interpreting and measuring who and what is going on, especially with the prevailing attitudes of our day. And we see this so frequently, whether or not people have decided LGBTQ people have existed, let alone their importance and their calling. But historians and queer people, and queer historians especially, are resilient and creative and determined. And I'd like to introduce you to a couple of people that we are willing to put in the LGBTQ identity community throughout the centuries, starting here. Go to the Byzantine Empire, around 1000 or so, where same-sex relationships were at what we best describe as don't ask, don't tell. One place where these relationships were allowed to flourish were in monasteries, naturally. The number of men of all ages who would say, I'm so sorry, I cannot get married to this woman. I am being called by God to go live with other men and not get married. That is an important blessing. These monks have already taken a vow of celibacy to live with the community of God. Monasteries and convents are a time-honored tradition for queer people across the ages. It was a natural, safe option. And while same-sex relationships are mentioned, there's also stories of saints who are assigned female at birth, but upon entering the monastery are treated as monks, suddenly given a different name and treated as all of the other men in the community. For example, Saint Eugenia was then known as Eugenios, and we know that through a great deal of gossip and scandal and drama that I would love to share with you, and also know that we need to end this before noon. But it is one of the time-honored traditions in a place like this to be able to share the drama that happens and to see how easily people say the problem wasn't the fact that this person was born a woman and is now a man. The problem is bureaucracy and harassment, and that is my problem with the world. And that's kind of delightful. The abbot, the head of the monastery, changes the names and the genders of people with ease. There's also a frequent problem abbots noticed of trying to address whether monks would potentially have relationships with each other. Again, being gay was not the problem. It was the vow of celibacy that was the problem. So the letters and bureaucracy would go on and on. This included moving several of the more conventionally attractive monks around to prevent problems. Victim blaming is as ancient as ever. 1,000 years ago, queer people were written not just into the shock and mythology, the scandal, the horror, but they were banal, they were bureaucratic, they were delightfully boring, and that gives me so much joy. Not exactly allyship as we would see it today, but a delightful surprise from a millennia ago. If we can bring us a few hundred years into the future, into the 1700s in America, many religious groups have moved to the US, which is still a British colony at this point, to be free from religious persecution from Europe. This includes the Puritans, the Anabaptists, and in our case, the Quakers. Jemima Wilkinson, born in 1752, was female and a fourth-generation American. In 1776, Wilkinson became sick with typhus, and in the depths of fever which lasted for days, people feared the worst. However, Wilkinson recovered. However, with that, she declared that Wilkinson herself had died during those days. Her soul had ascended into heaven, and instead God gave a new soul into the body that was formerly Jemima Wilkinson. The public universal friend now only answers to the friend, and they are beyond the concept of gender. This person would not be the first time that we see someone who has a revelation in the depths of illness, a near-death incident, and says, I am called by God, and they're indeed called by God for many great things. The friend preferred to be seen at most as masculine or gender neutral, preferably, and the friend had no problem making waves. They began the Society of Friends, a larger Quaker group, and preached on everything up and down the East Coast, including abolishing slavery, well before that was even a discussion in mainstream circles at the time, free will, abstinence, peace building, nonviolence, and friendships with indigenous communities, not just on the surface level, but genuine relationship building with our indigenous neighbors, relatives, and friends. They dealt with criticism naturally. As someone who has been told multiple times, I don't look anything like a minister, I can appreciate when someone gets told, you are not a real preacher, because they were born a woman, and now they're going by they and them and other gender-neutral pronouns, and because they dared to preach things like slavery is bad. They had an interesting moment where all of these comments pooled in, including whether their voice was acceptable, because some would call it melodious, and clear, and others grating and odd. The friend did not care. The friend was above these complaints. You can take it up with the friend's boss, God. They preached and pastored and loved until they died in 1819 at the age of 66. That is the funny thing about being called by God, by the sacred that sits with all of us, is that that call simply cannot be ignored. It refuses to be ignored. God refused to be ignored when Samuel and Eli were trying to figure out where this call was coming from. Some of you may recognize that call. It may have been that voice that told you to go on that career path because you're good at it, because people need you. It might have been those butterflies when you spoke to that person the first time and you realized, oh, I'm in trouble. I might have to marry that person. It is the time you try out your new name, first or last, sampling it like fine wine and realizing it tastes so sweet on the tongue. It is the feeling you can't ignore that tells you you are not alone, that we are here together to care for each other, or that you can help someone feel connected. That call is something that exists outside of what anyone else can tell you. No abbot in the Byzantine Empire was able to successfully tell someone that they were not called by God, that they were not loved. They made it difficult, but not impossible. Abbots could tell monks they couldn't stay there, or the behavior needs to be changed, but no one but God would ever remove that feeling in their bones. The public universal friend was told by basically everybody that they got it wrong and they weren't called. And once again, the friend said, take it up with my boss. He's the one that set me on this path. There will always be people that will try to police others and their behavior, to say who's in, who's out. There will always be people that will critique others, not because of their behavior, but because of the identity attached to it, that will say that it is our job to say that someone else is not worthy of God's love, to critique and bully and punch down because they're afraid, or they're angry, or they need to be the boss of someone. God does not operate that way. God never has. God called Samuel over and over and over. And I bet you that if he missed that call again, Samuel would have heard God's call some more. It was never about whether Samuel was ready for God. God was always ready for Samuel. God has called monks and nuns across the centuries, across the cultures, not worrying about who they love or what is on the inside or outside, only that they are there and they are called, and that is the job. God simply called them and said, you are my children, blessed and sacred. That is enough for me. God called the friend with such fervor that not even typhus, not even the bureaucracy of other angry Quakers and Puritans could deny them the right to preach. And while the church helped me prepare for the pulpit, discern my call, find my way here, the church did not call me. God did. This is the reason I am here. No one will take it away. During Pride Month, we can often feel like, as queer people, we need to prove something, that we're smart enough, we're strong enough, we're talented enough, we're able to speak both the church and Wellesley drag culture and also the Bay Street financial talk, that I can speak all levels, that I can be everything to everyone all at once. We are told that we need to give more and be more and love more and do more and say more and research more and leave more behind for a legacy that'll be gone well after we are. That we have that if we fit the mold that everyone puts in front of us, we'll be fine. But that mold cannot be fit all the time by everyone all at once. No one here, wherever you are, inside the community, outside, in the closet, or out in the street, you cannot fit all molds. The only one you need to fit is the one that God has put before you. We always worry that we've given enough of ourselves to the world that historians will have no doubts about who we are and why we're here centuries from now. God did not call us to live up to the measure of someone's idea of the criteria of queer, or of Christian, or of human. We are enough, in every way measurable, by God. No one here needs to measure their own worth on someone else's scale, or their human dignity with the criteria of another person's formula. Our call, every single one, the call to love, including loving ourselves, comes without limitations. It comes without criteria. God has called. God is calling. God will call again. Speak, O God, for your people are listening. Amen.